who reviews the reviewers? We do. This is Yesterzine, where we rejudge a magazine's best and worst rated games and dive deeper to find out what games coverage was like when there were somehow 3 games magazines spun off from TV series. To be fair, not quite simultaneously. You'll recognise the successful one of the 3. Gamesmaster magazine begun quite early in the series run during 1993 and outlived it by 20 years, not closing until 2018, when Ian Everdean's first and only editorial letter consists basically of, "Hi, I'm the new guy," but about that. Still, 25 years is a hell of a run, especially all with one publisher, and the other 2 are not going to beat that. The second is a short-lived Bad Influence tie-in that published a whole 2 issues, and we will look at that one day, I promise. This month though, we're on the other one, as with characteristic modesty and grace, Games World magazine stamps into the magazine world, ripping its shirt off and threatening to deck anyone that gets in its way. You already don't expect it to be a subtle magazine, and so it very much is not. But more on that story later. The Gaming Hell was the developer's direct follow-up to a previous Gaming Hell. Was it reviewed on merit or reputation? First though, Games World announces itself with a gaming heaven from the full-tilt, red-blooded, alpha-male, trendy, loud, modern world of, let me check my notes, tennis. There was a period, and we're towards the end of it, where there weren't a lot of licensed sports titles in the sense we understand it now. These days, you'd think it mad for the major Formula 1 game to have fictional cars, or for the major ice hockey game to include legally distinct teams, or for the major football game to not have a FIFA license. Well, okay, fair enough. But that's why the news of EA dropping paying for the FIFA license was such a bombshell. For 25 years, it's basically been the rule. You do a sports game, you license the series or governing body. EA, for their part, think they're fine with just their individual league and team licenses, and the FIFA name itself doesn't mean a lot these days. The only competition FIFA directly run, I believe, is the World Cup. But between entirely unlicensed games and fully licensed games, there was another era, the personal license. The king of this is the only one that's remained so, John Madden. Without an NFL license, EA sought a name to put on the game and found the former player. Madden, after his career was ended by injury before he ever played a professional game, went on to become the most successful coach in the sport's history by win percentage, and then a respected commentator.
Pat, I think it's safe to say that all these fans came out here to watch a game of football!
Despite, of course, it now also having a full license, it would seem weird if the game was just NFL 23. But it really should be, especially as John Madden died in 2021. But EA weren't the first. There were boxing games licensed by James Douglas, George Foreman and Mike Tyson among others, in lieu of licensing a whole roster of punchists. And in racing there's Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco, and multiple games for Nigel Mansell, Mario Andretti and Al Unser too, none of which included anything much official beyond that. Codemasters wanted in, and unable to find a celebrity Micro Machines racer to endorse that game, decided to make some sports titles instead under the Sportsmaster brand. The slogan feels like they had a committee meeting around a copy of NHLPA 93 because...
If it's in the game...
No, Jeff, that's EA.
It's in the...
EA again.
It's not in the game?
Jeff, how does that make people buy a game? You know, all the stuff you love. Not here, mate.
It's not a game.
Jeff! It's a game!
It's not just a game?
Jeff! That's brilliant. Ship it.
They tried the concept a few times. There's a Jonah Lomu rugby, a Brian Lara cricket, and before both of those, there's this. Pete Sampras tennis. Ah! Zombie Pete Sampras will kill us all! Okay, maybe he isn't that real either, but once you get over a not entirely successful photo digitising attempt, it's an attractive little game for a 16-bit. I guess there's only so much you can do for a tennis game from a static camera, and anyone who's played David Crane's Amazing Tennis will probably see the merit in a static camera, but it looks the part. Camera's over here, Pete! There are many options on the kind of game and court you want to play, as you'd expect by this era. No licensed tournaments, of course, but near equivalents, and the freedom to set up something that is basically the same as the favourite you're trying to create. One thing I did like is alongside the manual there is also a little cheat sheet reference card to tell you the admittedly fairly basic controls. That said, maybe I imagine it, but it plays a more complex game. In my first tentative match, it does seem that the other player adapts, and the more times I use a move or the directionality of a serve, the less well it works, and the player starts delivering balls short that I'm struggling to get to. It serves them well. Literally. What also literally serves well is the auto function, that at least delivers a legal ball across the net. It's not perfect on controls. Lack of buttons means the C button for a topspin shot shares with C button and a direction for a dive. But I'm often playing a shot while running, so more than once I dive past the ball like it's a bullet heading for the president. Unable to cope with the player being smart enough to counter my basic attacks, I lose the first game, despite saving a couple of match points. But I'm intrigued. While I choose a female fictional player whose name I've already forgotten to try again, it's time to look at the real USP of Pete Sampras tennis, the J-Cart. You may have noticed this game allows 4 players to play at once, and commendably, also allows CPU doubles partners. This was often cost prohibitive in other games though, because you needed all the obvious kit, plus an adapter to counter the fact the Mega Drive only has 2 joypad ports. Codemasters, already set up to make cartridges that were a bit interesting after their unlicensed NES cart shenanigans a couple of years earlier, had an idea. The Codemasters J-Cart put 2 extra ports right there in the cartridge themselves, which had 2 effects. One, it was a lot easier and cheaper to have 4 players since you were essentially now carrying your multi-tap with you. And 2, if you rage threw the controller out the window, that was now going to be much, much messier. The J-Cart is more famously associated with those Micro Machines games. It was used in 3 of them. But its first appearance is right here. Indeed, there's a preview of the first Micro Machines game to come equipped in this very issue. In the event, the fact that this is all coming along quite late in the machine's life means that other than a pair of Petes and a triumvirate of Micro Machines, the only other game to use one was the slightly strange decision by Codemasters to license what was essentially a Micro Machines clone in Super Skid Marks for a Mega Drive release, where of course it was competing against 3 Micro Machines games from the same publisher in 3 years. Meanwhile, back at the tennis ball, it's going better. Ish. I'm still not doing that well, and spoiler alert, we're still going to lose the match, but for a game fundamentally about twatting a ball while standing broadly in the same place, this has a lot of variety. I'm still convinced the AI is learning my moves. If I shake up what I'm doing, then generally I can score a couple before they start getting returned to places I no longer am. And while I'm losing more than I'm winning, it's almost never the game's fault. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm flailing uselessly at a drop shot. I know I'm hitting it straight to them. I know I've just smacked it into the crowd like it's a proposed social engagement. The only exception being those dives where the controls are just wrong. To be fair to Codemasters, this they knew. The sequel, Pete 96, shakes things up by using the C for just dive, and the topspin shot being pulled off with the other 2 buttons together. So you'd think I'd advise you to play that one instead, wouldn't you? But I'm not 100% convinced. The roster is reduced to just 8 fictional players, albeit with ones that have more defined personality and ability. They've also made it a lot harder to direct a shot, and ultimately for me I don't need this to be any more difficult. Plus this is the one I've got a cart for. There's another argument that might be more relevant to you, because it's the original that's had a re-release, on the Evercade Codemasters Collection cart. It's now under the name Tennis All-Stars because licensing, but other than menus and a name change for El Samps, it appears to me to be the exact same game, despite Evercade cheekily calling it, and I quote, a fully unreleased game. I was going to make a glib comment that then technically The Last of Us Part 1 on PS5 was fully unreleased because it was just The Last of Us on PS3, but actually they've changed a hell of a lot more in that game than they did here. It's pretty sneaky. It's not exactly as much of a crime as, say, promising no new exclusive releases for your new handheld console, then breaking that promise before pre-orders even start, for instance. But it's cheeky, especially when you literally confess to the crime in the manual for the game. Either way though, give at least one of the two a try. The SNES has the famous tennis games, notably Super Tennis and Jimmy Connors, but the Mega Drive is a bit less well served with ones you might actually want to play, and this is the best one I've discovered so far. A celebrity endorsement well deserved for once.
Game computer.
Speaking of celebrity endorsements, Dave the Games Animal Perry, a polarising figure in the 90s UK games scene, most well known for his appearances on Gamesmaster, which came to a sudden and dramatic end in late 1996 after he utterly cocked up a challenge on Mario 64 that even I can do, threw a gigantic strop about being set up, and was never seen again. But, like he says...
Not a journalist, I'm a marketing manager.
Which is fair enough. Anyway, let's open this new magazine and see which journalist is the editor of it. Crivens! So, to explain. Hewland International, who made Gamesmaster, made another show, Games World. It had many similarities to its sister show that would have got them into trouble if they weren't related, the Games Mistress section being especially on the nose, for instance. The shows did run to different premises. Games World was a lot more a games competition involving kids playing against each other and show professionals, playing silly characters over multiple episodes during the week, culminating in a final on the Friday show, sometimes featuring some surprisingly familiar faces.
Larry is quite frankly a few sandwiches short of a picnic. Oh yes indeed.
Hello, me.
And like Gamesmaster, there was a magazine, as you've probably deduced by this point in the episode. Games World was the official magazine of the show, and like Gamesmaster, would outlive the show's original run, as Games World was done after 3 seasons, pending a brief revival at the end of the decade. The magazine debuts as a big chunky boy for your £2.50. Not only is it a full 132 pages, but there's a 68-page book from Dave telling you how to win at his beloved beat-em-ups, which sadly I don't have. Plenty of beat-em-up content in the issue though. I really thought from the cover picture this was going to be a big preview of Rise of the Robots, but actually it's a beat-em-up from Accolade called The New Breed. Games World say it even puts the much-hyped Rise of the Robots in the shade. But I've never heard of it. And neither has Wikipedia. Or Moby Games. Wait, what's going on here? Well, the obvious really. Despite Games World spending 8 pages on it, presumably an editorial decision from the beat-em-up king, The New Breed, aka DNA Action, aka Cybernauts, was released exactly 3 fewer times than it had names. Amusing, but rather knackers our chances of finding something even funnier than this. While Accolade thought better of releasing The New Breed in 1994, they did apparently think this was a better idea. Balls 3D. Which, to be fair, got some perfectly okay review scores for what is basically a primary school playground joke made flesh. Back at the magazine, you may well be wondering how they fit in 8 pages on a game that literally doesn't exist, when they claim to review every game from 9 formats, plus the viable handhelds, and the arcades every month. It's a big list, and the answer lies in the foreplay section, making Bloggo's recent video a mere 28 years behind the times. I'd mock him more, but clearly forgetting I was writing this episode at the time, I'm the one who gave him that idea. And they race through those reviews. It's a rare game of the month, especially in a 132-page magazine that gets half a page. Especially as that's half a page of 4 people separately reviewing it, where apparently 7, 9, 8 and 8 out of 10 adds up to 94%. That's the high watermark too. The next page has full reviews of 7 games, none of which are getting more than 100 words from any one human. And also where Lost Vikings, which gets straight 8s from the 4 chaps, is 85 overall, but Dune 2, which gets 3 8s and a 7, is worth 86. I don't know how this works, both as a scoring system and a magazine. Because here's the thing, they've got 132 pages to fill in a month. That's 6 editorial pages a working day. So that's a lot of games for 4 people to be reviewing. Just speaking commercially, the amount of time you'd have to spend with a game when you're only going to fill approximately 1/16 of a page with your coverage of it is going to be essentially nil. And when that game is, for instance, deep involving Microprose Flight Sim F-15 Strike Eagle, then they really can't have played much of it at all. It usually goes the other way, in fact. Magazines like The One back in the day, or even Play today, use rarely updated buyer's guides to fill multiple pages per month essentially for free, and the reviews in Games World have a tendency to read exactly like that kind of cheaply produced filler copy. Combat Cars, for instance. Jason's review is almost literally, music is the best thing about it, controls like arse, 8 out of 10. And unfortunately, as someone who owns Combat Cars, ironically by the aforementioned accolade, I can tell you I agree with exactly half of the clauses in that sentence, and also about a quarter of that score. Not to give anything away, we're not going to get context for our gaming hell either. It's one of those tiny side reviews, and it does not have any more content than that implies. An old friend does pop up though. Point and click adventure Red Hell, where the review wants you to believe they played through the whole thing, which I don't believe for a second. They do spot its iffy control system, but not its love of locking you out of game-ending puzzles in the first 15 minutes. They also call the speech excellent. Here's a reminder of the speech.
Herr Hoffman, an unexpected pleasure. I am here to escort an experimental biochamber back to Los Alamos.
Page 25 includes a review of a, we totally played a finished version of, arcade machine called somehow Daytona Racing. A name for which Wikipedia's only reference is literally this review. You'd assume it was a working title that made final prototypes, but the game was called Daytona USA in this Japanese preview VHS, despite, for instance, the famous 3.7 Speedway being referred to by its genuine working title, Short Oval 3.7. In any case, we hardly have time to ponder that before we're on page 26 of a 132-page magazine, and the Ultimate Buyer's Guide is already over. So what the heck are they using the other 107 pages for? Well, 2 ways primarily. The first is a big feature on every single gaming machine out or imminent. In 2022, this would be a dull feature. It's Xbox Series, PlayStation 5, Switch. The first 2 are basically the same machine, the last one is, at least on a technical level, essentially a mobile phone with a controller. Clip that one, internet. No, really, I need the views, and I'm sure it'll only attract purely rational people. Speaking of rational people, Games World claim not to care about any technical capability at all. So, let's see if they get through the entire article without any comments about ability to do 3D and the like. Also, if they're doing, and we quote, all the machines on the market, where is the Master System? It would get commercial releases at least as long as a couple of the machines in this list. Obviously it's the weakest technically, but we don't care about that. Do we? After all, if you're interested in some sort of stuffy technical manual, then look elsewhere, right? Let's get the payoff for that setup out of the way immediately. The first concrete information they give about any of the machines is that the Mega Drive has a 7.67 MHz Motorola 68000 CPU. Nothing says non-technical like specifying the speed of a chip down to 2 decimal places, right? Still, we can also enjoy important non-technical details like 64 kilobytes of video RAM, 64 colours from a palette of 512, and a screen resolution of 320 by 224. I'm done now. And besides, these are the easy machines. They're dominant at the time of writing, but they're heading for replacement, so they are not a long-term bet. There's not a lot to say other than going 3 for 3 with false optimism about the Mars add-on for the Mega Drive, which was ultimately named the 32X after the number they sold, the DSP in Virtua Racing that was never used in a game again, and a promise of a 1995, maybe 1996 UK release for the March 1997 released N64. The Mega CD is described as having plenty of legs. The last release for the machine was barely a year away. Hardly surprising, since a complete setup was still selling for a price that would buy you a PlayStation 12 months later. The Game Boy is described as a phenomenon despite the tech specs we're absolutely not talking about in this section. They correctly say it'll keep going, their reasoning being no one would be stupid enough to launch a competitor. So anyway, next is the Sega Game Gear, competitor to the Game Boy, a machine they describe as converting people from the Game Boy the second they see it. At this point you wonder if they've just written every part of this just to please the machine's fanboys. We largely skip the PC section as they perplexingly split it into two different machines depending on if you put a CD drive in it, and criticise the CD games for being normal games on a CD, a crime they've literally just let the Mega CD get away with. The Amiga is correctly identified as on its way out in a year or two, almost the exact period the remaining Amiga games magazines had left. Although the 1200 again is considered a different machine, whose primary feature appears to be that you can play the old games on it. I'd mock this, but next comes the CD32, which looks to have quite a rosy future. By the time this magazine was published, they had already stopped producing it. This isn't what we're here for though, is it? We want to see if they were right about the imminent 32-bit battle. So we pause only to enjoy that the Neo Geo section taught me several new things about the technical specification of that machine before venturing on. The Jaguar is eagerly awaited and will give them half marks. They claim the late UK arrival is due to massive demand in the US, but that would be news to the US and to Atari's own corporate report that 6 months from now would say Jaguar sales did not meet expectation and barely numbered 100,000 by the end of 1994. Games World do say the backing isn't there, and they're right, Atari admitting that even by the end of the year there were only 25 games. The CDI they feel isn't performing as a games machine, no debate there, even if it astonishingly had platform exclusive Zelda games. They also correctly described the VHS style multi-manufacturer experiment of the 3DO as in danger of ending up like Betamax. They also just about have the Saturn's number, although their best insight is hidden right in the middle of the text as they predict the era of arcade perfect conversions, although the Saturn Daytona would sadly not be it either time. They ruin it slightly by picking out Virtua Fighters, not its name, Virtua Soccer, not its name, Virtua Racing, wasn't released on the Saturn by Sega, and Daytona Racing, not its name, as their examples. But then they had also just highlighted the new Project Reality system from some company called Nintendo. Speaking of Nintendo, they got everything wrong about the N64 we saw Total do a few months ago as well. Presumably because they're speaking from the same press release. As mentioned, it didn't make the UK in 1995, or 1996. And to be fair to Games World, unlike Total, they expressed doubt that the machine really can do these demos, and spot on, it could not. But here's the test. Magazines of the time were quick to dismiss the machine known then as the Sony PSX. Games World are not. They, like other magazines, talk up its sprite capabilities, completely missing the point, but otherwise they're one of the few to point out Sony's purchases of companies like Psygnosis, deals with the likes of Namco, and general media savvy means it has a good chance. It certainly did. Just for completeness, we should highlight the SNK Neo Star, the next generation Neo Geo. They don't have any real information, and that's fair because it never did get released. And actually, like the CD32, by the time we got this magazine, there was no longer any Neo Geo hardware being made. Elsewhere, there's the usual magazine staples. An attempt at a news section whose main story is, this magazine exists. Worth covering though, because it was a little controversial. Sky went as far as refusing to transmit an episode of the parent TV show whose entire second half was essentially a lengthy advert for the magazine. This episode, in fact.
I want the big boy to write this month's column, and I want him now! Hi, Barry. Yes, it's Dave. Would you like to write this month's column for Games World? Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Because, of course, Paragon were a competitor of Murdoch's empire. In the intro letter, Dave said, "There's nothing sadder than a loser, so play to win. Know what I mean?" I do, Dave, and I assume it explains the existence of the large cheats section in the middle of the magazine. If you can't beat 'em, cheat 'em, after all. The remainder of the magazine, a space roughly 5 times the size of the review section, is mostly various types of game preview. They attempt to explain this in a long-winded intro. Future screens are early looks. Games Watch games are more imminent, and Games World specials are for the biggest games. This is the treatment the new breed incorrectly got. Future screens are easy enough. Little sections pretty much literally just to say, this game will exist soon. I say little sections, they're longer than most of the reviews. It's the Games Watch section that confuses me. Having devoted no more than half a page to telling you if you should buy any particular game that actually exists, they devoted pages to telling you that at some point in the future they will tell you if you should buy games that don't yet. It feels like an ass-backwards way of doing a games magazine. Surely you want the detail about what you're deciding to buy now. And about that, because apparently being in the review section doesn't mean you can't also be in the preview section. There is a full page on Pete Sampras, a game they reviewed only 75 pages ago. The preview has a word count at least 4 times that of the review. There is more though. A reminder that Games World magazine claimed to give knowledge coming from the source and information based on fact rather than flimsy speculation. Why then does Pete Sampras cost $44.99 on page 15 and $39.99 on page 79? I know Codemasters are notorious for discounting their games quickly, but that has got to be a new record. Then again, that's not even the weird one, because Urban Strike is shown in the future screens and in Games Watch. They can't even restrict themselves to one sort of preview in this chaotic mess of a periodical. I guess that's what happens when you hire a
marketing manager
to edit your magazine. So to our gaming hell, and I fear that magazine episode of Games World is not going to be the worst acting we're going to see this episode, because we're back in the realms of the full motion video shooter, a genre short-lived in the mainstream where companies made up for not being able to do realistic graphics by just overlaying an attempt at a game over the best quality movie footage they could film and make the machine play. This is from a company we've seen before. Sadly, not Digital Pictures, makers of cult classic Night Trap and genuinely pretty good shooter Ground Zero Texas. No, friends, we're in the realm of American laser games. When we saw them before, it was on the 3DO, with a version of the pretty famous arcade machine Mad Dog McCree back in episode 17. We had a pile of problems with it, not least that the next generation 3DO was seemingly delivering video from a Mega CD. That there were horrible loading pauses, even between you shooting and something happening, and that objects to hit were sometimes almost entirely invisible. Worst was a joypad-only control system that effectively gave your character the quick draw skills of one of those one day from retirement security guards whose banks get robbed at the start of bad movies. Even if you had the sequence down, there were movements that bordered on the impossible. Who Shot Johnny Rock is both different and the same, following directly on from Mad Dog as American Laser Games' second, American Laser game. It's a different setting, a 1920s private eye drama where a woman I assume to be your mum hires you to find the killer of her fiancé Johnny Rock, the guy from the game title. There are 4 suspects, and they all introduce themselves in the attract loop. Don't worry about too many spoilers, by the way, partly because plot is a very kind word for what's about to follow, but also because which of our 4 suspects did a murdering is randomised on every playthrough, along with a few more things. I should let you know at this point, while there are Sega CD and 3DO versions of this game available, Games World reviewed, and we are playing the PC-DOS version. This means no light gun. but it does mean a mouse. Nature's light gun. This should remove our major problem with the 3DO version of McRae at least. It's also telling me the video quality hasn't improved. Granted, this is an early PC CD game, but this is hideously blurry rubbish, and that becomes important quickly, as this delivery man turns out to be delivering a bullet, although I'm not sure how he expects us to sign for it. Then comes a pair of the game's randomised elements. The lucky number changes every playthrough, and so too does whichever of these two gentlemen is the one who wants to shoot you. Which lets us point out that the game doesn't have lives, it has money. Dying will cost you money and medical treatment, but so will both extra bullets and funeral expenses for shooting innocents. In practice, I don't think it makes a difference, because it is all but impossible to run out of bullets. The lucky number is apparently a number you can shoot in the levels for more money, but I didn't work out when you could actually do this. The clues to the murderer are in Johnny's safe, and for some reason each of our suspects has one of the numbers for the combination in the form of a clue. So we need to visit all four of them, then Johnny's house. These you can do in any order, and it's here we start to see some of the same problems Mad Dog had. For instance, I spent a lot of time on this, the start of the pool hall section. Mostly here it's targets with an impossibly small time to hit them, like this woman, or the chap who rolls in and then becomes literally the only guy in the entire game who gets up again, which is just a way for the game to burn a life. The hitboxes too seem wildly inconsistent, often with the same enemy. Multiple times repeating this section, I was entirely ready for Green Woman and got there immediately, but apparently not quite in whatever it had decided was the right place at that time. To be fair, this might not be the game as such. The version included with Exodus was crashy for me, so I'm using a Windows 10 version customised by White Bob, which does still use DOSBox underneath, and without access to a handy 486, I can't tell you if the original version was this finicky as well. What the original version will have been is this short. You remember its roots as an arcade game quite quickly. Once you get inside the pool hall, there's a reasonably short scene of some fairly telegraphed people who are going to try and shoot you a few seconds apart, before the suspect gives up and lets you have his clue to the safe code. And thus, we have already finished 2 of the game's 6 levels. The most frustrating of the 4 is the casino. Several of the people are innocents, and exactly who is one of those things the game randomises. The trouble is, with the absolutely tiny time periods you have to react, and I burn more money in this section than anywhere in the game. Although it does let me enjoy the single best scream acting you will ever see in your life. There's also one here in the back right where the muddy video quality means I still don't know where I'm supposed to actually shoot. It also doesn't help you that in at least one case the same person might be an innocent or might be about to shoot you. Frustration in the home version is alleviated 2 ways. Firstly, the continues and lives do at least put you in the venue rather than having to do the shootout outside again, and those continues are infinite. While the game is enforcing money like the arcade, there is both a save option and the ability to just continue forever at the state you were in. The second nice thing is that the surprisingly lengthy cutscenes are entirely skippable. Still though, that is the only way you're going to complete this, by brute forcing. Your deaths are going to be divided roughly into the equal categories I'm an idiot, I was unlucky with an innocent, and I clearly shot him, you absolute desk of a game. The climactic mansion scene is a little disappointing. You have to shoot about 5 people total, choose the right object clues to get the code, and then shoot the safe while it's on the right numbers. This is actually surprisingly difficult, and I think I got it wrong not quite remembering which objects I've been given as clues. Even so, shooting the safe isn't a gimme. They should have presented a panel, really. It's clearly a universal problem, because when Digital Leisure re-released the game as a DVD player compatible thing a decade later, they told you a master code in the manual that just happens to be the easiest possible code to shoot. I do disagree with Games World though. Mouse is a perfectly good way to play a game like this. It might actually be more user-friendly than a gun, when a gun doesn't have an on-screen crosshair. I ended up running it in a window to make the distances you need to move the mouse lower. Ultimately though, it's the other flaws that kill this game. The hitboxes are tricky, the timing poor, and a game that needs you to identify whether you need to shoot an enemy very quickly fundamentally needs better video quality than this. I can't disagree with the 15% Games World awarded. As a full price game that you can grind through in about 15 minutes, it's laughably thin. And only the Sega CD version supports any kind of actual gun. Thing is, I downloaded this from archive.org and so could you. On that basis, it might well be an amusing distraction for an hour or so. It's obviously not the biggest download, and it works immediately, and as perfectly as it was ever possible for it to. Just don't expect it to actually be good. On the back page, may I recommend my good friend Lee and his YouTube channel, More Fun Making It. He's a talented chap, Lee. He took my Game Gear, which he charitably described as very broken, and made it do this. We're not here to talk Sega though, because I actually want to push you towards the recent series. Lee acquired a ZX Spectrum in the kind of condition that would make a skip spit it out, and tries to make it live. Worse, someone has clearly tried before. Does he succeed? Well, obviously I'm not going to tell you that. And if you like that, maybe stay on to watch the fate of an Atari VCS that ended up with the affectionate nickname Trash Bag. It's the feel-good movie of autumn. And it'll really be autumn when you join us again in October for more Yesterzine. In the meantime, liking tells YouTube people want to see it, subscribing tells YouTube you want to see it, and the bell icon appears to do shit all, so why not hit it and tell me what happens. See you next month.